idea to do a graphic novel about medical ethics basically came from an observation that most topics about medical ethics are written in a language that is geared very much towards a target audience of professors, graduate students, postdocs, doctors, and so forth.
What we keyed in on is that these medical ethics situations, the people that are really affected by it aren't always the ones that are in academia.
The average person gets sent as a doctor. I mean, it doesn't take 4 years of medical school and a lifetime of residency to understand why someone gets pissed off at a doctor and acting like a jerk.
Basically, it shouldn't just be a bunch of academics talking amongst themselves about bad behavior.
If they're just doctors talking, debating about how they behave, they're not allowing other people who are influenced by a doctor's actions, for example, their patients, to be active in understanding why a doctor does what he does.
Allowing anybody to see what goes on between docs and patients is the premise of MEDTHICS.
The wonderful thing about graphic novels or comic books is people view them as an entertaining form of communication.
Everyone has either flipped through a comic book or read a comic strip in a newspaper, so it's not a foreign medium to the general public.
So the real power of the internet is it's so widely accessible. It is a great medium for disseminating information, especially when your target audience is the general population.
So you combine a graphic novel with the internet, and what you get on the surface, it looks like a lay form of communication, but it can really communicate serious issues.
Our blog was set up so that our readers, who we really hope, include a lot of just general people who aren't in the health profession, would have a forum for them to discuss the issues amongst themselves, these ethical issues that we present.
Our intentions weren't to really tell people what to think or feel directly.
Right, it's not didactic like that. It's set up so that they could discuss their own interpretations of what they've just read and bounce ideas off each other and generate discussion, maybe build consensus.
So the Stories of MEDTHICS is very simple and works on a very basic principle. Take a group of healthcare professionals at different levels of training and just watch how they interact with each other and towards their patients.
In Hollywood speak, this is based on a true story, but really it's only very loosely based on events that happened in an intensive care unit over a 6-week period.
But the focus of MEDTHICS isn't so much about the specific events themselves or the end result of what happened. It's about how the healthcare workers deal with the events, for better or for worse, and how they treat each other and their patients.
Right, the most important thing is the character that these guys in the graphic novel give off to the reader, and that's what we really want people to think about.
The things that actually happen in MEDTHICS do really happen in a clinical setting. And for the most part, this is normal for most healthcare workers, and we usually don't give it a second thought.
The weird thing is that putting things in the shape of cartoons and looking at them in different angles creates a completely different meaning to an event.
From the onset, when we knew we wanted to do a graphic novel, we had a very specific idea of what we wanted to look like, and we knew that there would be a great general appeal for a comic book about doctors, but we did have one minor problem.
And the problem Ed is talking about is that none of us could draw.
We had, however, seen the movie A Scanner Darkly, where they'd taken live-action film and vectorized it into a real surreal-looking animated type finished product, and we felt we could do something similar in print using Photoshop.
So we take photos, and then these are photoshopped to look like cartoons. After the story is written out and storyboarded, then we get together for a day of shooting,
where we act out the frames and try to express certain emotions.
I was told to cry for this image.
I was told to look sick for this.
I'm acting like I just don't care.
Give a look that says you just haven't done anything.
A moment of realization.
Here I'm just looking somber and smiling.
Some of the medical equipment in our graphic novel are made from regular household parts.
For example, we used the vacuum hosing and shot glass to make a ventilator for issue 2. And some of the equipment we just photoshopped afterwards, like the bag in issue 3. Every character in MEDTHICS has been carefully crafted so that it creates some very interesting chemistry amongst them. They're not really based on any one particular individual, except for some of the things the med student might have said or done. Overall, the characters are based on particular character traits, like naivety, methodic, jaded, compassionate, and friendly. It is these traits that has become very polarized so that it pushes a certain point across.
The medical student, who, by the way, is in his first year of training, is the one that's closest to the everyman, and he's really the voice of common sense. It makes sense because here's a guy who's starting, beginning of his training, and he's still got all these ties to his normal life. So he's just joining this world, he hasn't been exposed to the years of death and dying that might make someone treat it like an everyday occurrence.
Death and dying is not normal. Well, it's normal to individuals in the profession, but it's not normal for the average person to see people dying in front of you. So if someone dies and then someone cries afterwards, that's normal. But if someone dies and someone stands there stiff and just watches it all emotionless, that's not normal. I think the reactions of the med student are the kind of things most people would think and say if they were in that situation.
The resident character is someone who's in transition, and the kind of guy who, if put in the right or wrong conditions, can shoot out two very different paths. He's worked his ass off to get where he is. He sometimes acts like an automaton because of all the training and long hours he's gone. But deep down, he's not so far removed from the med student. When he sees this bright-eyed kid, he can sort of understand what it's like and reflect on who he is and where he's going in his future.
Dr. Garg, the attending physician, personifies not so much a bad doctor, but rather has traits that are present to some degree in all doctors. In Dr. Garg's case, all these traits are clustered into just one individual. He says things that aren't necessarily bad, but just unusual for an average person to hear or interpret. Likewise, he does things that aren't necessarily bad, but just not what an average person is used to seeing.
People in healthcare probably wouldn't give it a second thought, but for an average person, some of the things he says or does might come off as being insensitive and bordering cruel at times. That's why it's great to see how given scenarios played out between the med student and Dr. Garg. Something fairly routine to the attending might be taken and blown way out of proportion by the med student simply because it's not something that is normal in the outside world.
The Dr. Robin character is in direct contrast to Dr. Garg. He's the kind of guy who would want people to call him by his first name. He loves treating people working under him to lunch, and all of the nurses love him. One of the reasons this character was introduced was to show the differences in attending docs' personalities. It also shows how the management of care for a patient can change dramatically depending on which doctor is looking after them.
The nurse is your prototypical nurse. He's the kind of character who might be at odds with the doctor, only because he's looking out for the best interest of the patient. In future issues, we'll really get to see what kind of person the nurse is.
The nurse was probably the easiest person to write because the attitude of, I just work here and I have a very distinct life outside of all of this madness is something that tends to resonate with some nurses. Is that ability to maintain a sense of normalcy and connection to life, which I think distinguishes doctors from nurses. Having said that, we did also try to convey the nurse who has become jaded and disapproves of everything everyone does.
I've played mainly the patients, and the thing about patients who get sick enough that they have to end up in a hospital is that they just lie there and get as much rest as they can, hoping that they might get better. So there isn't really much that the patient says or can't say because they're just too sick. It's interesting because we get to see how docs act around a patient when they think the patient isn't awake.
In future issues, we're going to really focus on the characters of MEDTHICS more so. Who are they? Where do they live? And do they have families?
The first issue was really more of a proof of concept. We needed to see how it would look, the final result, graphically and visually. And we didn't really know how the stories would play out or how readers would react to certain storylines.
Some ambivalent moments were presented to see how the general public would react to them. And we then used that to make either future issues more or less clear.
In the second issue, the conflicts were much more clearly outlined.
Yeah, we wanted to see if the reactions of the reader would be more intense if we portrayed the scenarios in a blunter and more direct fashion.
We were trying to engage as many people as possible.
We got a lot more people reading the comic after issue 2, so once we have that accomplished, the direction of issue 3 and subsequent issues will be more focused on character.
Issue 3 was the resident story. Up until this issue, it seemed like everyone in MEDTHICS was this borderline bad doctor except for the naive med student. But in issue 3, it's shown that the resident is really a complex character.
In future issues, the Dr. Garg character is going to go through some very interesting changes.
Basically, if these cartoon pictures can make people think, and I mean anyone, not just healthcare workers, if people take away an appreciation for how delicate the art of medicine really is, we'll be quite happy that we have accomplished our goals.